What if there once existed a civilization so vast, so advanced, that it stretched across continents, only to be erased from history? A kingdom that defied our understanding of time, technology, and human evolution. And yet, almost no one remembers its name. They call it Tartaria, or sometimes the Tartarian Empire. To some, it's a forgotten super-civilization that ruled the ancient world long before recorded history. To others, it's nothing more than a myth born from internet speculation and misinterpreted architecture. But between those extremes lies a mystery that refuses to die. From the ornate domes of old Russian cities to the intricate stonework of Central Asia and the abandoned palaces of Siberia, evidence seems to whisper of a lost people, a forgotten age of human brilliance. Maps from centuries past label enormous regions as Great Tartary. Historical texts mention Tartars, yet their origins remain blurry, shifting like sand through the fingers of time. Could there truly have been a civilization erased by cataclysm or rewritten by history itself? Was Tartaria an empire of extraordinary knowledge, silenced by the victors who came after, or just a romantic illusion shaped by coincidence and confusion? In this episode, we dive deep into the legend of Tartaria. We'll examine the archaeological clues, the architectural anomalies, and the scientific skepticism surrounding it. We'll separate the myths from the measurable, but also ask, why does the idea of Tartaria captivate millions today? Perhaps hidden beneath layers of history, there lies a forgotten chapter of our species, a chapter that could change how we see civilization itself. Because sometimes, the line between myth and truth is drawn not by evidence, but by who's allowed to remember. To understand the mystery of Tartaria, we must first step back, far back, into the shadowed corridors of early civilization. Between the crumbling remains of the last ice age and the dawn of written history, human societies were rising, falling, and evolving across vast continents. Yet, so much of this prehistoric human story remains missing, buried under glaciers, deserts, and political narratives. The enigma of Great Tartary. The first known references to Tartaria appear on European maps from the 15th to 18th centuries. These maps, often hand-drawn by explorers and merchants, depict a massive land stretching across northern and central Asia, from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. The term Tartary was not a country, but a vast, loosely understood territory, often marked as Magna Tartaria or Great Tartary. Yet here's the strange part. While empires like Rome, Persia, and China left behind vast records of kings, monuments, and cities, Tartaria leaves almost nothing. No official language, no confirmed ruins, no chronicles, just a name, and the haunting suggestion of a people forgotten by history. Historians traditionally explain it as a European geographical shorthand used to describe the nomadic tribes and kingdoms north of China and Persia, such as the Mongols, Turkic peoples, and Siberian tribes. But some researchers and alternative historians argue otherwise. They claim that Tartaria wasn't just a region, it was an empire, one possessing technology, architecture, and knowledge beyond its time. The architectural puzzle. Step into the streets of St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kazan, or even old cities across Central Asia, and you'll find buildings with domes, intricate patterns, and monumental designs. So advanced, they seem almost out of place for their era. Proponents of the Tartarian Empire theory suggest that these were not the creations of the 17th or 18th centuries, but remnants of a far older and more sophisticated civilization. They point to features like perfectly symmetrical star forts found across Eurasia and even in parts of Europe and America, ornate cathedral domes resembling power conductors allegedly linked to free energy technologies, enormous stone and brick structures with construction techniques supposedly impossible for their claimed historical periods. To believers, these are not coincidences. They see them as fingerprints of a vanished culture, a civilization that may have harnessed forms of energy, magnetism, or engineering now lost to us. But mainstream archaeologists caution against such leaps. They remind us that architecture evolves in waves, influenced by trade, conquest, and imitation. The resemblance between distant structures doesn't necessarily imply a single global civilization, only that humans, no matter where they lived, shared similar dreams of monumentality and beauty, maps, myths, and manipulation. Ancient maps can be both enlightening and deceptive. The Tartaria maps that fascinate the internet were drawn in an age when much of Asia was uncharted. Mapmakers often filled blank spaces with speculation, legends, or artistic symbols. Still, one can't help but wonder, how could so many maps across different centuries reference a land so large and so consistent in name? Some researchers propose that Tartaria was the European label for the Mongol Turkic world, encompassing countless tribes and Khanates, from the Golden Horde to the Khanate of Sibir. Over centuries, this patchwork of societies may have fused into the mythic idea of a single empire. Others, more radical in their interpretations, claim something more sinister, that Tartaria's history was deliberately erased. They point to missing archives, destroyed buildings, and rewritten timelines during the 18th and 19th centuries, when global powers like the British and Russian empires expanded rapidly. Was Tartaria simply swallowed by imperial conquest and bureaucratic renaming, or was something intentionally hidden? The mud flood theory. One of the strangest subplots of the Tartaria legend is the mud flood hypothesis. According to this idea, a global cataclysm, perhaps a natural disaster, perhaps something else, buried entire cities under layers of mud and sediment sometime in the 18th or 19th century. Supporters point to old photographs showing buildings where the lower floors appear submerged beneath the ground, as if the earth had suddenly risen to swallow them. Archaeologically, such phenomena can often be explained by centuries of sediment buildup, reconstruction, or changing street levels, normal in many ancient cities. But to Tartaria enthusiasts, these buried structures are evidence of a reset, a civilization wiped away in an instant and replaced by rewritten history, science, skepticism, and silence. From a scientific standpoint, the claims of Tartaria face significant hurdles. No stratified archaeological layers, ancient tools, or distinctive artifacts have been confirmed to belong to such an empire. No DNA evidence suggests a unified Tartarian race or culture. Most historians view Tartaria as a cartographic and linguistic confusion rather than a lost kingdom. Yet, archaeology has surprised us before. We once thought Göbekli Tepe was impossible, a temple complex 12,000 years old, long before agriculture or writing. We dismissed the Indus Valley script as fantasy until it was unearthed beneath Pakistan's soil. Even the existence of Denisovans, a new branch of prehistoric humans, was unknown until their DNA was discovered in a Siberian cave in 2010. So the question lingers, if these discoveries can rewrite prehistory, could Tartaria, too, hide some forgotten truth? Because every myth, no matter how far-fetched, is born from a seed of reality, a memory distorted by time, waiting for someone to listen. The story of Tartaria, whether factual or fabricated, is ultimately a story about human memory, how we remember, and how easily we forget. The lost civilization theory, ancient builders, forgotten engineers. Imagine standing in a frozen Siberian plain thousands of years ago, a landscape of endless white and wind, where prehistoric humans battled for survival against mammoths and ice. Now imagine, beneath that same soil, buried domes, forgotten foundations, and geometric layouts that suggest something once stood there. something far greater than any tribe or wandering people. This is the image that fuels the Tartarian mystery, the idea that long before our known empires, an advanced human civilization thrived across Eurasia, perhaps even globally. A civilization out of place in time. Proponents of the Tartarian Empire hypothesis describe it as a lost superculture, a network of cities connected by star-shaped fortresses, colossal buildings, and unified architectural principles. They argue that what we call imperial or Baroque design, the domes, spires, and electromagnetic motifs seen across continents, might actually be the last remnants of Tartarian architecture. Take, for example, the star forts, enormous geometric fortifications that appear not only in Europe and Russia, but also in India, Africa, and the Americas. Their perfect symmetry and complex angles often astonish modern engineers. How could such designs have spread globally before the age of international travel and communication? Historians attribute their similarity to shared military principles, geometry, gunpowder warfare, and Renaissance design. But to Tartaria theorists, it's a sign of something older, a once unified architectural code, like a forgotten language of stone. Some even claim that these cities may have harnessed electromagnetic energy, not in the mystical sense, but as a forgotten branch of natural science. They point to structures such as St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, whose copper domes and towering spires resemble gigantic conductors. Could these have once been part of a now-lost global energy network? Mainstream science says no, but the theory itself raises an intriguing question. How much ancient knowledge has humanity lost, and how much of it might we mistake as coincidence? The reset of civilization. Every great myth has a catastrophe, a moment when the world resets. For Tartaria, that catastrophe is the mud flood. Believers describe it as a sudden, worldwide deluge of mud or liquefied earth that buried cities, suffocated knowledge, and wiped away traces of this global civilization. They claim that after this event, the surviving elites rebuilt on top of the old world, reusing Tartarian structures and rebranding them as their own creations. Walk through the streets of old Moscow, St. Petersburg, or even parts of Paris or New York, and you'll sometimes find windows and doors below ground level, half buried. To conventional historians, this is the result of centuries of reconstruction, street elevation, or flooding. But to Tartarian enthusiasts, it's evidence that something massive once reshaped the surface of our world, a literal burying of the past. And when you pair that with the Industrial Revolution's sudden rise, a strange pattern emerges. Machines appeared, knowledge exploded, and global empires expanded, as if the 19th century had awakened into a world already prepared, its foundations already laid. Could this sudden leap forward have been humanity rediscovering old Tartarian technologies rather than inventing them anew? It's a provocative idea, one that challenges our very notion of progress. A world connected by forgotten lines. Some Tartaria researchers point to the global spread of similar design motifs, domes, antennas, spires, and free energy-like shapes, as evidence of a forgotten network. They note that cathedrals, mosques, and palaces across continents share uncanny patterns, sacred geometry, repeating symbols like the sunburst, spiral, and concentric circle, all ancient representations of energy, power, and creation. In this view, Tartaria wasn't a single empire, but a shared cultural frequency, a worldwide civilization that understood energy, vibration, and architectural harmony in ways we can barely grasp today. Some even compare this to the concept of Atlantis, Plato's legendary advanced society that fell beneath the sea. But Tartaria, unlike Atlantis, isn't described as oceanic or mythical. It's geographical, rooted in the maps of history itself. If Atlantis was the myth of the lost ocean kingdom, Tartaria could be the myth of the lost continent-wide civilization, the forgotten builders of humanity's hidden chapter. The human element, memory and amnesia. But here lies the deeper question. Why do we forget? Throughout human evolution, memory has always been fragile. We know that Homo sapiens once coexisted with Neanderthals and Denisovans, three distinct human species sharing the same Earth. Yet for tens of thousands of years, their stories vanished until archaeology pieced them together again. Entire civilizations, from the Indus Valley to Anatolia's Çatalhöyük, remained unknown until modern excavation revealed them. So is it really impossible that something like Tartaria once existed, only to be buried beneath the vast weight of time, disaster, or conquest? What if our understanding of history is like a puzzle missing half its pieces, and the story of Tartaria is one of them? The allure of the lost world. Perhaps the fascination with Tartaria isn't just about bricks, domes, or maps, but about yearning, a yearning for continuity in a fragmented past. For a story that connects human ingenuity across millennia, for the idea that we've been here before, that humanity once reached a golden age of knowledge, unity, and technology, and somehow lost it. It's a reflection of our own time, a digital civilization standing on fragile ground, wondering if we too might be erased one day. Our data turned to dust, our monuments misunderstood. In that way, Tartaria becomes more than a mystery. It becomes a mirror, reflecting our deepest fear and fascination, that progress is not a straight line, but a circle, and that perhaps we're just rediscovering what our ancestors already knew. Transition to Part 2. But if Tartaria truly existed, if there was a great empire stretching from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific, then where is the proof? Why don't we find its language, artifacts, or genetic footprint? Why does mainstream archaeology dismiss it so completely? In the next part, we'll explore the other side of the story, the evidence that contradicts the Tartaria myth, the scientific counterarguments, and the possibility that this entire mystery is not a cover-up, but a fascinating misunderstanding of history itself. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden, it's simply misread. The counterarguments, debunking or redefining the legend. For every grand theory of a lost civilization, there comes a moment of reckoning, when imagination collides with science. And for Tartaria, that collision is as fierce as the mystery itself. Let's now turn from speculation to the evidence, and see where fact ends and fantasy begins. The problem of missing proof. Archaeologists and historians often start with a simple question. Where are the layers? Every civilization leaves a trail. Pottery shards, bones, scripts, coins, ruins, and cultural strata buried in sequence through time. Egypt has its hieroglyphs. Mesopotamia has its cuneiform. The Indus Valley left its seals. But Tartaria? Nothing of the kind. Despite centuries of excavations across Russia, Central Asia, and Siberia, no distinct cultural layer, no unique writing system, tools, or burial traditions have been found that point to a unified Tartarian civilization. The Great Tartary, on old maps, scientists argue, was not an empire, but a cartographic shorthand, a European name for vast unmapped regions inhabited by dozens of ethnic groups, Turkic, Mongol, Uralic, and Siberian. The term Tartars was loosely used to describe anyone east of the Caspian Sea. In other words, Tartaria wasn't erased. It was never a single empire to begin with. It was a projection, an idea born from the limitations of early geography. Still, that explanation doesn't fully satisfy everyone, because even if the name was misunderstood, it doesn't explain the architectural mysteries, the anomalies, and the patterns found across continents. The star forts and domes. Explained. The star-shaped forts that populate the Tartaria hypothesis are real, beautifully real. but their origins are well documented in Western military engineering. They emerged during the Renaissance in the 15th and 16th centuries when gunpowder changed warfare. To withstand cannon fire, fortresses adopted angular, symmetrical designs that could deflect blasts and provide overlapping fields of defense. These designs spread rapidly through Europe, carried by Italian architects and adapted by every empire, including the Russian Tsardom and the Ottoman state. So yes, the geometry was global, but not mysterious. It was mathematical evolution. As for the domes and spires, their resemblance across continents reflects shared architectural inspiration, not ancient high-tech. Domes have existed since antiquity, from the Pantheon in Rome to Byzantine cathedrals and Islamic mosques. The idea that these were antennas for free energy may sound alluring, but no physical evidence supports it. Modern tests show no electromagnetic residues, no unusual materials, and no mechanisms hidden within the architecture. What we see instead is art, human art, a fusion of beauty, symmetry, and sacred proportion. So perhaps the genius of Tartaria wasn't lost technology, but the timeless human instinct to build in harmony with the heavens. The mud flood, natural or mythic. The so-called mud flood photos, showing half-buried buildings, are among the most striking pieces of evidence circulated online. At first glance, they do seem uncanny. Why would a building's first floor be buried underground? Historians and geologists, however, offer clear explanations. Cities evolve vertically. Over centuries, street levels rise due to reconstruction, new paving, waste accumulation, and flood control. Old foundations become basements. New streets are built higher. This is visible in ancient Rome, London, and Istanbul, where entire Roman streets lie meters below the modern surface. No global catastrophe required. The mud flood theory, they argue, romanticizes normal urban evolution into a grand apocalypse. But its persistence reveals something deeper, a distrust of official history and a yearning to uncover what might have been hidden. Because deep down, humans are storytellers, and when history leaves gaps, we fill them. The historical rewrites. One of the strongest points raised by Tartaria believers is the rewriting of history, how colonial powers and empires have often erased indigenous narratives. And here the skeptics must concede something important. History has indeed been rewritten many times. Empires have destroyed records, burned libraries, and rebranded the past to serve their image. The Mongols, for example, were once painted solely as destroyers until archaeology revealed the sophistication of their cities and trade networks. So while Tartaria as an empire may not have existed, it's plausible that real cultures within those regions were suppressed, renamed, or forgotten under later imperial rule. In that sense, Tartaria may be a symbolic truth, a collective memory of lost peoples and buried cultures that never received credit for their contributions to human civilization. It's the idea of Tartaria that survives, even if the empire itself did not. The psychology of lost civilizations. Why does the Tartaria legend resonate so powerfully today? Sociologists suggest it reflects a modern longing for mystery in an age of data and algorithms. We live in a time when satellites map every inch of Earth, yet our connection to meaning, myth, and wonder feels thinner than ever. The idea of Tartaria, an erased utopia, an empire with clean energy and architectural perfection, appeals to our subconscious desire to believe that humanity once lived in harmony, that progress isn't just chaos and greed, but something higher we've lost. Just as myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Shambhala speak to our yearning for forgotten wisdom, Tartaria offers a distinctly modern myth, a civilization both ancient and technological, both earthly and transcendent. And maybe that's the point. The story of Tartaria is less about proving an empire existed and more about proving that our sense of wonder still does. the scientific reality, and the mystery that remains archaeology works in layers, and so does truth. Science tells us that the lands once labeled Tartary were home to rich, complex societies, the Scythians, Sarmatians, Huns, Mongols, and Turkic tribes. Each had their own art, metallurgy, and spiritual traditions, often erased by war and empire. So when people look at the domes of St. Petersburg or the ruins of Samarkand and feel that they belong to something older, maybe they're sensing an echo of these forgotten cultures. The Tartaria myth, then, could be our imperfect memory of the real lost kingdoms of the steppe, woven together over centuries into a single legend. After all, history is rarely destroyed in one blow. It's rewritten slowly, layer by layer, until truth becomes myth, and myth becomes internet theory. Transition to reflection. So, was Tartaria a real empire? Archaeology says no. But as a symbol, as a reflection of our yearning for connection to the deep past, maybe it's more real than we think. Because whether or not Tartaria existed in stone, it exists in us, in our imagination, in our hunger to rediscover what it means to be human, and in our belief that something extraordinary once walked this earth before us. In the next section, we'll step away from ruins and theories and ask a more profound question. What does Tartaria teach us about ourselves, about how civilizations rise, fall, and forget, and what that says about our own fragile empire of the present day? What Tartaria teaches us about memory, power, and the fragility of civilization? Let's step back for a moment. Forget the domes, the mud floods, the maps. Forget even the question of whether Tartaria was real or myth. Because in the end, the legend of Tartaria is not only about what might have been buried beneath our feet, but also about what's buried within us. The story beneath the story. Every civilization, from the first hunter-gatherer tribes to the skyscraper cities of today, stands on the bones of forgotten worlds. Long before the pyramids of Egypt, Göbekli Tepe was already aligned with the stars. Long before the Greeks or the Romans, unknown peoples carved vast stone temples across the Fertile Crescent. And long before we called it Russia, or Mongolia, or China, human beings wandered the tundra and the steppe, building fires, stories, and perhaps even cities that time forgot. Maybe Tartaria is not a lie. Maybe it's a metaphor for how easily human brilliance can vanish when memory fails. The nature of amnesia. History is fragile. A single empire can last 1,000 years and be reduced to dust in one. A single volcanic eruption, flood, or war can erase entire libraries, rewrite maps, and silence voices forever. If a civilization as mighty as Rome could fall, if the Maya could abandon their cities to the jungle, if the Indus Valley's script could disappear without a trace, then why not Tartaria? The idea reminds us of a sobering truth. Human memory is not permanent. Our achievements are carved not in stone, but in sand, waiting for the next wave of time to wash them away. We think we live in an age of permanence, with data clouds, archives, and satellites orbiting above us, but even now, our records are vulnerable. One solar storm, one collapse of digital infrastructure, and the story of our world could vanish as easily as any lost empire. Could it be that, thousands of years from now, someone will look at the ruins of our cities and ask who we were? Would they see our skyscrapers as mysterious relics, our power grids as energy temples, our highways as the veins of a vanished civilization? Control of the narrative Tartaria also teaches us something profound about power. Who writes history decides who is remembered and who is forgotten. Every empire tells its story as the story of progress. Those who lose their wars, their languages, their archives, they vanish from the textbooks. In a sense, the idea of Tartaria might represent every silenced people, every erased culture that never got to tell its side. It's a warning. that truth too can be conquered, that history, like territory, can be occupied. So when modern historians and archaeologists debate Tartaria, they're not just arguing about maps, they're arguing about ownership of memory. And perhaps that's why the topic stirs such emotion, because deep down, it's not about one empire. It's about the right to remember. A mirror for the modern age. Today, humanity stands on the edge of another kind of empire, a digital one. We build not with stone, but with data, not with spires, but with satellites. Our monuments are algorithms, our chronicles are in the cloud. And yet, the legend of Tartaria whispers a question to us. What if our civilization, too, is temporary? What if the skyscrapers, the airplanes, the cities of light are just another layer waiting to be buried under future mud? We tend to see progress as linear, but perhaps it's cyclical. Each rise carries within it the seed of its own collapse. Each golden age eventually turns to dust, and what remains is the memory, or the myth, of what once was. In that sense, Tartaria is not a fantasy of the past, but a prophecy of the present. It reminds us how fragile the chain of knowledge truly is, and how easily an entire world can forget itself, reclaiming the ancient flame. Yet there's hope in this story, too, because even if Tartaria never existed, the curiosity it awakens in millions proves something extraordinary. We are still searching. We still look to the ruins and ask questions. We still hunger to know where we came from and what we've lost. That curiosity, that refusal to accept easy answers, is the same fire that drove early humans to paint on cave walls, to map the stars, to wonder why we exist at all. It's the same spark that led scientists to uncover Neanderthal DNA, to dig beneath Göbekli Tepe, to discover Denisovans in the frozen bones of Siberia. Maybe Tartaria is our modern myth, but it's also our modern motivation. It pushes us to look deeper, to question the official story, to realize that truth often hides in forgotten places. And that's not pseudoscience. That's the foundation of science itself. Curiosity, doubt, exploration, the real legacy of Tartaria. In the end, the lesson of Tartaria may not be about lost technology or global conspiracies, but about something much more human, humility. For all our intelligence, we still know so little about our own origins. Every year, archaeologists find something that rewrites a chapter of our history, a fossil, a city, a tool that doesn't fit the timeline. The Earth is vast, and time is deeper than we can imagine. If humanity has existed for over 300,000 years, and written history covers barely 5,000 of them, that means 99% of our story is still missing. Maybe Tartaria lies somewhere in that missing 99%. Or maybe it's an echo, a reminder that we're not the first to dream of building a perfect world. Either way, it urges us to protect what we have now, our knowledge, our culture, our story, so that future generations don't have to guess who we were. A moment of reflection. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the world 1,000 years from now. The cities empty, the maps rewritten, the monuments eroded. A lone explorer brushes the sand off a strange metal tower and wonders what it once meant. Will they invent myths about us too? Will they call us the lost empire of the digital age? Will they think our power lines were conduits of divine energy, our satellites, the eyes of gods? Perhaps that's the truest message of Tartaria, that one day we will be the mystery, and the way we tell our story, or fail to, will decide how we are remembered. Transition to conclusion. So maybe the question, was Tartaria real, isn't the one that matters most. Maybe the better question is, what does our belief in Tartaria reveal about the human spirit? About our endless need to connect the dots, to reach beyond what we can prove, and to rediscover our place in the ancient web of life that stretches from the first humans to the far future. In the final part of this journey, We'll bring the threads together, myth, memory, and meaning, and leave with one haunting question. Do we really know the whole story of our own species? The forgotten empire within us. The legend of Tartaria ends much the way it begins, in mystery. It leaves us standing at the threshold between myth and reality, staring into a fog of forgotten history, and asking, what truly happened to the world before ours? Maybe Tartaria was never an empire of bricks and steel, but an empire of memory, a vast collection of stories, symbols, and longings stitched together across centuries. Maybe it was born not from evidence, but from the ache to understand the silence of time. Because deep down, humanity has always feared one thing above all else: being forgotten. The echo of lost civilizations. History, after all, is full of ghosts. For every Rome or Egypt we uncover, there are 1,000 unnamed peoples whose cities turned to dust before our first history books were written. The ice buried them. The deserts swallowed them. The jungles reclaimed them. And yet, even in the absence of proof, their presence lingers, in myths, in symbols, in the faint familiarity of ancient art and geometry. Maybe Tartaria is one of those echoes, not a lie, but a memory distorted by time. Each lost civilization reminds us that human evolution is not a straight ascent, but a cycle: creation, collapse, rediscovery. The same cycle that brought prehistoric humans out of Africa, that guided Neanderthals across icy Europe, that birthed cities like Çatalhöyük and Uruk, only for them to fade again. And perhaps, once upon a time, it brought forth something we now call Tartaria, a name, an idea, a civilization erased by the same tides that will one day erase us. Why we keep searching. But here's the beautiful paradox. Even if Tartaria is a myth, the search for it is real. It's what drives explorers, scientists, and dreamers to dig through frozen tundra and forgotten libraries, chasing fragments of who we were. It's what makes us human. We are the species that refuses to stop asking questions, even when the answers dissolve in mystery. We look at ancient ruins and wonder, could we have been more? We stare into the stars and whisper, could we be again? That restless curiosity is the same fire that carried us through the Ice Age, that taught us to carve symbols, to light fires, to record our stories in stone. And now, in this digital age, it drives us to preserve our knowledge, to make sure our civilization doesn't vanish like Tartaria's might have. The myth reminds us of something powerful, that knowledge is survival and that forgetting is extinction. The mirror of the present. Look around at our world today. The skyscrapers, the satellites, the fragile web of global technology connecting us all. We like to think we've reached the peak of progress. But so did the civilizations before us. The Tartaria story asks, what if progress isn't permanent? What if our empires too can crumble overnight, to war, climate, or our own arrogance? And what if, in the far future, our descendants look back at the ruins of our cities and invent myths about a lost age of digital gods? Would they think our skyscrapers were temples? Would they call our data centers energy hubs of an ancient forgotten empire? Perhaps we are Tartaria, the next Tartaria, and just don't know it yet. The final question. So, was the lost kingdom of Tartaria real? Maybe not in the way the maps suggest. But in another sense, yes, because Tartaria is a mirror of humanity itself. It's our need to believe we once lived in harmony with nature. It's our yearning to reclaim forgotten wisdom. It's our refusal to accept that history is complete. And that's the point. The truth of Tartaria doesn't lie in the ruins. It lies in the questions it makes us ask. Questions that push us to look deeper, to wonder harder, and to never stop searching for the hidden connections between past and present, because every myth begins as memory and every discovery begins as myth. Closing words. So next time you walk past an old building with strange domes or see a forgotten map with faded lines, pause for a moment. You might just be looking at a shadow from a world we've forgotten, a whisper from an age that still lives somewhere in the collective heartbeat of our species. And ask yourself, if civilizations like Tartaria did rise and fall before us, what will we leave behind for those who come after? Will our story be remembered or rewritten? Do we really know everything about our ancestors? Or are we just beginning to remember who we truly are? If you enjoyed this journey into the mystery of Tartaria, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because the next episode will take us even deeper into the forgotten past. Until then, keep your mind open and your curiosity burning, because the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.